At the moment in time, as I stared down at my massive furry hands, I couldn't help but be, well, a mixture of overwhelmed, astonished, and completely freaked out.
Oh man, my freaking hands! They're huge! Oh, this is so weird. Have a tail?
Beginning to notice that my voice had changed, just like as when I had seen Renee do it, seeming to double up, having a secondary, deeper voice that seemed to speak at the same time.
Oh, my voice! That is so freaky. This is so weird.
I said, beginning to feel myself over, starting at the head and moving down. Reaching up to the top of my head, I obviously had big fluffy ears, a long protruding snout, big sharp teeth, of course all but the teeth covered in hair. As I began to feel the rest of myself over, I found that Renee's description was fairly apt. I was covered in a very thick coat of silver fur, thicker in some places than others, but it was definitely thick. I could still feel my musculature underneath the fur. Looking down at my chest, I could see that somewhere in there you could find the shape of my muscles, which seemed to somehow be visible within the fur. So once again, Renee wasn't lying about that. Down to find, well, my feet or paws. They actually looked a bit different than Renee's, which looked much more canine-like. Mine actually looked somewhere in between. It was as if the midsection of my foot had extended, and my feet were longer, and I naturally just stood on the very front of my feet, them holding up the rest of my body. It was as if I had to consciously make an effort to have my entire foot, including the heel, placed on the ground. It seemed as if naturally my body would simply lift up by the front and the front alone. The entire thing was, of course, still furry, and I, of course, had claws on my feet, which was really weird. My toes were actually a bit longer as well. Not extraordinarily so, but enough that I felt like I had a little bit of extra mobility in them. As I moved them around somewhat, beginning to flex, before accidentally tearing into the padded floor as I gripped them, the nails on my toes tearing right in.
I'm sorry. Oh, this is freaking me out. Yep, I'm a werewolf. I am most definitely a werewolf.
It was at that point that my attention was drawn to my very long and fluffy tail, which seemed to alternate, wagging, shifting between waving in front of me from the left and waving in front of me from the right, as if it naturally just wanted to make a swing in each direction before turning around and going the other way. I actually had to consciously make an effort to stop it and try to take a look, grasping hold of it.
Yep, that's a tail. That is a big, fluffy tail. Oh, that is so freaky.
As I felt the tail, I could actually feel the fur. For whatever reason, it didn't feel like there was a center to it, as if it was all fur. As I began to check, trying to feel the tail over, slowly making my way down as it reached the connection towards me, I found that the physical tail itself only ran a few feet, possibly 3 or 4 feet. But with my new increase in size, I was having a bit of a problem gauging size. After all, you spend your entire life gauging how big things are when you're normal sized, and when you suddenly increase by a great margin, suddenly it's a bit harder to differentiate. But it was clear that the entire tail wasn't physically me, only a few feet of it, and the rest seemed to simply be fur, extremely long fur that had extended out from the tail itself. Yet somehow I could still feel it, like there were nerve endings in the fur.
Oh, this is weird.
Well, you're gonna need to get used to it. You're a werewolf now, she said, as she approached me without any hesitation, simply peering up at me with a big smile on her face. And with all being said and done, Victor, you are a very handsome werewolf.
Come on, you have to be kidding me.
As suddenly, there was that swirl of wind emanating from Renee again, as her form as well began to shift, and in no time at all, she took the form of a werewolf right there in front of me, joining me in my transformation. I was actually surprised. For a moment, I had expected Renee to dwarf me again, like the last time she transformed. But this time, as she transformed, finishing up, revealing her full wolf form and state, I easily noticed that she was smaller than me. I mean, I felt like she was so huge before, but now, as I looked at her, for whatever reason, perhaps the change in perspective, suddenly, other things began to pop out at me about her. Her stature, obviously. While she was easily 8 foot tall, I was still taller than her, by maybe a foot, or more, most, as well as being a bit lankier than her, seeming to have more tone and length. Also, another thing that strangely seemed to bother me for some reason is that suddenly I was actually beginning to pick out the subtle differences, things that I didn't notice the first time she transformed. For example, even though she transformed into a werewolf, her physique, the physique of a woman, seemed to carry over. I could actually tell from her frame and stature that she was female.
It's okay, Victor. See, I'm a werewolf now too. It's nothing to be worried about. You're just you. Just a little extra furry, that's all. Well, and much stronger and more capable. It's a gift, Victor. A blessing that makes us capable of extraordinary feats. Don't worry so much,
Renee said, that voice overlapping, which before I found very freaky. And I especially found it freaky when it started coming from me. But as Renee spoke, for whatever reason, I seemed to disregard it, or some part of my brain did, and her voice just felt like her voice, as she extended her arms, wrapping them around me, giving me a hug and pulling me in tightly. I hesitated for a moment, not really sure what to do with my arms, as she clutched herself around my midsection. But soon enough, I gained enough control over the fear that I might accidentally claw her to actually hug back, trying to be gentle.
See, that wasn't bad at all, was it?
Renee said, still hugging me.
See, you haven't hurt me, and I haven't hurt you. Just like normal, right?
Pulling back from the hug a bit and beginning to look me in the eyes, that glowing gold just staring up at me.
You're going to be fine, Victor. I know, the first time you transform and remember it is a little startling, especially for people who weren't born werewolves and didn't have anyone to teach them. But in time, you'll come to accept this as simply part of who you are. It doesn't make you any better or worse. As a person, you, just like before, are free to choose your own path and be the type of man that you want to be. It's not as if just because you're furry now, you have to go out stalking and killing people on the full moon or something. You still get to be you, Victor. It'll be alright.
Renee said as she began to nuzzle in, pressing her nose and head into my neck below me, which I have to say felt very nice, assuring, and comforting for some reason.